Good to be back. We tried our hardest to leave DP there, but like a lost puppy dog, he just tagged along. It was kind of our running joke whenever we were there. I was gonna, like, I don't know if this was elder contracted, but with me and Bob, but I was gonna tip off TSA and tell them that there was this shady looking dude who kept, like, I kept seeing him put stuff in his bag, but I didn't even have to do that. We got to Pittsburgh Airport, and first thing, we all breezed through TSA, and we're like, where's DP? And we looked back, and he's being frisked. So it was a beautiful thing. And then on the way back, same thing. We were leaving Quito late Friday. We had an 11:30 p.m. flight. And we were leaving Quito, and same thing. We kind of breezed through, and we're like, well, where's DP? And we look back, and they had his bag open, and they're ripping stuff out. And I was like, put him in cuffs. But they didn't. We had a very good trip, and I'm actually going to talk about the trip for the sermon because this congregation partnered with our team, and over the course of a year, we raised right about $4,000 just from this congregation alone. That's incredible, and I think that is worth giving an applaud to. That was a tremendous help because this trip was, it's very expensive. It's expensive to travel, and each of us on the team had a financial responsibility. I think it was like $750 per adult, and half of that for children. And the reason is, that pays for transportation, it pays for food, and it pays for us to be able to have the supplies and things that that it took whenever we went out and served people in the community. So a lot of work was done, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to back up and reread this again, just because it's so powerful. And I had given a devotional lesson whenever we were there. We took turns. There was a sign-up list, and each night we had a devotional. And this was my scripture, not in Matthew 6, but in Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 47. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and the breaking of bread and the prayers. And all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending to the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Laura Campbell had sent an article to our group before we took this trip. And I thought it was really interesting because a lot of times we refer to these week-long trips. I think this is kind of an American thing, but we refer to these week-long trips as short-term mission trips. She sent an article to our group that she said, I'm not going to be offended if you call it a short-term mission trip, but this is just a different way to think about things. And the article was about not calling these short trips mission trips. And the premise of the article is that when we go and we serve people, we're doing what Christians should be doing. And part of the reason that we tend to call them short-term mission trips is because we're not normally doing this. And so we get all razzed up and excited when we spend 7 consecutive days working for the Lord, when that was commonplace. The people who are sent are missionaries. Rusty and Laura, they're long-term missionaries in Ecuador. But when we went there, we were serving. We were doing this. And it was a really neat experience for us to have that commonality with both the Ecuadorian natives and the missionaries and the people who came from all across the U.S. So we had people from, where all were they? Andrews, Texas, Dallas, the Dallas area. There were a bunch of people from there. North Carolina, and I forget some of the other places. But we had people come from all over the U.S. We had over 50 people in our group. And then we had the Campbells, and then we had the native people. Most of us didn't speak Spanish, so we had to use interpreters. But what was really cool, and this is going to be in the presentation, is when we worshiped together last Sunday, Rusty asked me if I would preach, and he would be my interpreter. So I preached, and of course DP made fun of me. He's like, well, I came to Ecuador to get away from his preaching, and then, you know, now we find out that Jimmy's preaching. So that's right. You heard it twice, once in English and once in Spanish. But it was just really cool because one of the things that they did there at the congregation is we would sing a verse in Spanish, and everybody would sing together. They put the words up on the screen, and then we would sing it in English. And then they would split the screen, and half of us would sing in English and half of us in Spanish at the same time. And that was a really neat experience. And there was a reason why Rusty does that. And Rusty said it's neat because even when we don't understand each other's languages, Christians have this common bond. And he said sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't sound so great, but he's like, sometimes there are these moments where there's just this deep connection in that song, and we got to experience that, and it was really, really neat. So I'm going to talk about the commonality of believers and what we did while we were there. This is our whole group. This picture here, this was taken at the fire pit at the camp. Oh, it would help if I pulled this up. So give me 1 second. This is what happens when you're really tired. You don't prep. Okay, I thought I shared it. I know I shared it. So the question is, where is it? Why are you not here? It was here this morning. I promise you. I did share it. I shared it from Natalie created it in my drive. Well, you know what I can do? I can just log into my account and go back. That's what I'm going to do. Cover your eyes when I put my password in. Let me do this. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. All right, maybe I should get Victor, my tech guy. I did. It's called Ecuador 2019. It was there, but here's what I can do. I can go into the email. Because when I shared it, it sends an email. See? I told you I shared it. Oh, that's why it wasn't in photos. Duh. Okay, here we go. I forgot that Natalie did this as a presentation for some reason. Okay, so some of the things that we did while we were there. There was a VBS, and this was really cool because there was a lot of creativity from the group here. And they went all out. And so everything was in Spanish. And Eden and Cameron got to participate. And they did skits. And we went out and did door knocking in the community. And I'll show you pictures of that. But you can see the VBS room with the white screen. And like they went all out and decorated this massive room. And we had, towards the end, we had over 100 kids show up from the community. But we went out and we did door knocking, and that little girl with Eden, the redheaded girl, is Josh Markham's daughter, Josh and Julie Markham. And the Markhams are the people who went and started Operation Ecuador in Ecuador 25 years ago. So she is the granddaughter of Kent Markham, and of course they live there, so they're fluent in Spanish. So we went around and we were kind of tagging along with the little kids because we don't speak Spanish. So they're just going around, and I mean, it was really cool because the kids were knocking doors and they had no problem talking to people. And we got to meet a lot of the people in the community. The one sticking her tongue out there, that's another daughter of Josh and Julie. That's their oldest daughter, Michaela. And you can see Isaac there. He was very serious. He was into it. We were handing out these flyers that talked about VBS. It was the invitations. And this is above the camp, the little village above the camp. So you can see the view there. It's just breathtaking. And you're looking at snow-capped mountains, and you're sitting right on the equator, and there are these two different snow-capped mountains in the background. It's just gorgeous. So they put skits together. Natalie was on the VBS crew with a bunch of other people. They had translators, and they put these cool skits on. But the top left one, if you see the people wearing pillowcases, they parted the sea. And when they walked across the sea, the Egyptians went into the sea, and all those people who were the water and the waves, they like wrapped themselves around the Egyptians and brought them down to the ground. It was really cool. They did a lot of crafts and games for VBS. So you can see the different people working the craft stations, and they had this alarm, and they would switch from one thing to the other. And the camp is, what did Rusty say, like 50-some acres? And there's just tons of space outside to do games. So here is the picture of, these are all kids from the community. So this community, of course, it's a developing nation, so there's a lot of poverty. It's just a very, very poor community. And when they send invitations out to these kids, it's not just about getting into the VBS and having this, rah-rah good time, though it was a lot of fun. But a lot of these kids don't have their next meal. They're just incredibly poor. One of the houses that we knocked, outside of her home, it was this old lady, and Natalie was talking to her in Spanish. And she had these, it was a basket with a few beans and just a couple things drying out in the sun, and that probably was her meal for the week. So it's extreme poverty. So when these kids come down to the camp, they're exposed to the camp, and they get to meet Rusty and Laura, and they talk about the services that they do for the community. So all year round, they serve people in the community. They do events for kids in the community. They have an after-school program that they run at the camp, and they feed the kids. They give them a meal. They let them play. They do tutoring, after-school tutoring. So they provide services at the camp all year round. So when these kids come to VBS, they're now exposed to the camp. They're aware that it's there, and they know what services they provide. So these kids, a lot of these kids will wind up being part of the after-school program. And I think, what'd you say on the first day, Natalie? There were like 20 or 40 or so. How many? Started off with 10. And then kids just started, so they did one group. They were like, well, we don't have enough kids to break into groups like we originally planned, so they did one group. Well, kids kept trickling in from the community because word gets out. And so by the end of the first day, they had like, what, 30 or 40 some kids. And by then, it was too late to split them into groups, so they had this one big massive group. But by the end of the week, there were over 100 kids. Isn't that cool? This was a wall that some of us worked on. So it started as a big dirt wall where they scraped away. They leveled the field and scraped it away. And we had to dig a footer and pour concrete. So we mixed concrete the entire week. Some of us were out there most of the week, and it was just back-breaking work. But this is going to be another thing that when they do the community program and bring kids from the community, they're going to have different sports and things that they can plug kids into. So it's not just like, hey, let's keep people busy and mix concrete. This is all to serve their local community, and they do it all year round. This was all dug out by a machine, but then everything that we did was hand dug. So we had to make the wall straight, the dirt, And then we had to dig a footer 30 centimeters deep, and then pour concrete and throw rocks in. So there's DP pretending to work. He really slept most of the trip. Natalie was the one doing all the work. But we had kids mixing concrete, so this wasn't like, you know, the kids weren't there just to bang toys together. Like, these boys worked hard. The Van Egdoms, they worked really hard all week. And I mean, all of our kids did. They did wonderful. Except for DP. DP slept or got the other workers to mess around. While we were all working, doing the backbreaking work, this is what DP was doing. But at one point, DP fell asleep, and he woke up and was like, "Water, I need water." And he was too lazy to get his own water, so poor Isaac had to come and serve DP. It's terrible, I tell you. This was part of the crew, and we just took turns. Some of us were there most of the week, but other people just kind of floated from one thing to the other. So we just basically found out where we were needed and got plugged in. So this picture in the bottom is what the wall looked like at the end of the week. That was taken Friday morning. Natalie took that Friday morning. So you can see what we accomplished, and that was hard work for everybody except DP. And then there was a pole barn that this started with a couple little pads of concrete on the first day, and towards the end of the week, I didn't get a finished picture, but they were actually putting the roof on this whenever we left Friday. There's some of the roof panels that they painted. There were 50 panels that they painted. These were really heavy fiberglass roof panels, and I was actually working DP in this picture while DP was napping. Devotionals. Every single night we did a devotional, and like I said, we took turns. My night was the night that we did it. Had the outside fire here, and DP and Bill, you can see them wearing their aprons. They came from KP duty, so every night different families were assigned to do dishes so that we didn't overwhelm the staff. So these guys came from KP duty and came to the Devo. This was one of the Devos that we did, and Josh Markham was the one who did the Devo. And while we were at Devo, this was towards the end of the week, and they had the people who did the skits for VBS put the skits on for all of us, because we were all doing our different jobs, so we didn't get to see them at VBS. So we had a Devo/entertainment night, and DP was looking groggy in that because he had just woken up and was about to go back to sleep. There were two different song leading workshops that Bill and Stephen Lockwood there in the middle and DP did. So Stephen is the deacon of missions at Bellevue Church in Bellevue, Washington. So he was there for the first few days, and he is a very talented musician. And so they did a workshop. Where did you do the one was at the Cayambe Church of Christ, which is the picture of Bill standing in front of the sign there. That was about a 20-minute drive. That was one of the church plants. So Rusty and Laura, in addition to running a camp, they plant churches all over. So this is one of the church plants. And I had done a workshop on abuse and a previous night at this same church. And Josh Markham was my interpreter, and it was just really well received. And then Bill and DP and Stephen did a music workshop here. Oh, and then the one below is the local church that Rusty and Laura also planted, which is just down the hill from the camp. So this is about probably a mile from the camp. And that's where I preached on last Sunday morning, and these guys did a workshop there. This was the Tapacundo Church of Christ. Again, that's the one that in the bottom picture is where Bill and Stephen are pictured here, along with Guillermo wearing the yellow hat. He's one of the employees at the camp. And then Ben, he's a student at the School of Preaching. So there's a School of Preaching in Quito that Josh Markham runs And this guy's from Guatemala, and he was actually here on his honeymoon. Him and his wife had just gotten married, and they decided to spend their honeymoon doing work with us. So the Tabacundo Church of Christ is a church about 50 people. It's a recent church plant. I think they planted this a year or two ago. And the church said, you know, we're a group of Christians and we'd like to have a building. So Rusty said, well, fine, but we're not just going to pump American money into building this building, because buildings are expensive. And, you know, the culture there is that if you do things for people, kind of like here, if you do things for people, they sit back and prop their feet up and say, thanks, but it's the wrong color or something like that. So Rusty said, as part of this church plant, if they wanted a building, the local people were going to have to raise their own money. It was a matter of months, and they raised enough building to build this building. So Rusty said, all right, they're taking incredible initiative, and so this church is just a really hardworking church and great group of Christians. That was me preaching with Rusty as my interpreter. And oh, come on. I didn't know I had to get access from myself. This is a video of us singing in the 2 different languages. I just have to change the settings here. Now we should be able to watch it. This is just a few seconds. So that was both English and Spanish at the same time. And we more than doubled their church attendance that Sunday. So they had about 50 people, and we had more than 50 people from our group. So we had over 100 people there, which was a big shot in the arm for them. Then we had a bunch of side projects. That's Isaac standing with Stacy. These are big, huge wooden benches that we used. We celebrated the 4th of July. And as part of that, we needed people to get it ready. So Natalie and Stacy and Isaac did standing on the benches and table. This concrete was poured the day that we left. There was a small group who went to Quito, and this is all by hand. You mix everything by hand in 5-gallon buckets, and you carry it all up. So this crew turned these dirt floors in this woman's apartment. She's a church member at the Quito Church of Christ, which is another church plant that Rusty and Laura did. So you can see just the impact over and over and over. There are hundreds of Christians meeting in churches that Rusty and Laura planted. But this woman, it's a really tragic story, but she's a single mother and grandmother, very, very poor. Her bed sits on a dirt floor, and all these floors were dirt in her apartment. Her husband is in prison because he abused their daughter, and actually has a child with his biological daughter. And the little boy was there when we visited. Rusty had called me up whenever he first found out about this and said, "Hey, we have this big problem at the church in Quito. We need to know how to navigate through this." And so I had actually forgotten about this. So I had helped Rusty kind of walk through this and get the guy put in prison where he belongs. And so when I showed up here and Rusty said, "Hey, remember that lady in that situation?" That was kind of emotional for me to get to see that and to see. And she just broke down in tears and was so grateful for this crew that came and fixed up her house. She's now able to rent this space out, and that'll be revenue for her. So she owned the space, but it wasn't usable. So she will lease this out. That's the crew that poured the concrete. There were house painting projects. And Bill, was this the single mother's apartment that you guys painted? So this was another woman, church member or community member? Community. So this is a woman from the community. Bill and I think DP, did you paint with Bill at this? Okay. So it was blue. Green is the final product. And they just went down and went out. And so they went with the team. And part of this is not just about painting houses and doing things like that, but a lot of these community members told the people, the translators, that these Christians, we can't believe that people came here who don't even speak our language and they're serving in this way. And you know, one person who was an atheist who they served in the community said, I'm starting to question now, and I believe there is a God. So, you know, they'll follow up. The church members in Ecuador will follow up with these people, and a lot of these people become Christians and become church leaders in these churches. This is the Bible Institute in Quito. Down at the bottom is the part of the medical mission team. Every day, the medical mission team, made up of 2 doctors, a husband and a wife, the Alexanders from Texas, and then a whole bunch of nurses and different people from other American crews. They set up medical clinics in different parts. So sometimes it was on the camp. Other times they went out into different communities and different villages and did medical missions. But a lot of heartbreaking stories came out of this, but it's incredibly hopeful, and it's just really cool. But on Friday, the day that we left, the medical mission team did a mission at the Bible Institute in downtown Quito. And inside of the Bible College is another Church of Christ. And there are about 400 members. And you walk in, and it's the Bible classes, and Josh Markham oversees all of that. So he trains people to become ministers. And inside, they have a church building, so the Bible students get to practice and preach inside the building where they have classes. So Josh's philosophy, I went to graduate school with Josh, and Josh's philosophy is not the American model where we train people then say good luck. Josh gets each and every person who graduates the Bible Institute plugged into a church in Ecuador, and if they don't have a church to get plugged into, they plant a church. So if you graduate the Bible Institute, you go to work, because that's what you're there to do. So the church, you can see it's spreading and spreading and spreading big time in Ecuador. And that's Eden with one of Josh and Julie's daughters. They became BFFs. And this is Kai. This is guinea pig. It's a delicacy in Ecuador. So our last night there, they cooked up some Kai and cut it up into pieces. So some of us were brave enough to eat some guinea pig. And then we got to do some R&R. This is Gaga Ball, the pit there. And the kids, if we couldn't find the kids, we knew that they were at the Gaga pit. DP sleeping again. 2 seconds. How come me and Stacy have all kinds of pictures of you sleeping in that very position? We got to visit the equator. This is right on the equator. The picture on top with the puppy dog. That was our last supper, the one on the bottom. That was Friday night before we flew out. More crafts and things like that. This is right on, this is actually the equator. That little 2-inch strip, that is the exact center of the Earth. And that little round marker is a certified U.S. marker. And I need more access. Sorry, guys, I didn't know I needed all this access. No, we're getting access for this one. We are definitely getting access for this one. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Oh, there are more where these came from. Yeah, for a little bit. Now I got to figure out where we're at. I think if I refresh it, I'll be able to, because I did grant access. This is the last video, then I'll give an invitation to DP, because he needs to repent from all that sleeping. No, in all seriousness, DP was a champ. He worked so hard sometimes. And the people of Ecuador absolutely love DP. They were like, please send this guy back here to Ecuador. We were down there working and mixing concrete and just sweating, and it's back-breaking work. DP came down and it turned into a party instantly. So I do have a video of DP and Ben with the shovels. They picked up shovels and were jamming, and we had a lot of fun and a lot of hard work. And this is just a fraction of the stuff that we did all week. So many lives were impacted down there, and we thank you guys. Because without your financial support and your prayers, this wouldn't have happened. And we look forward to hopefully going back sometime soon. All right. I will offer up an invitation and just tell you, go out and bless people. We don't have to go away to do it. These are the things that we can and should be doing right here. If there's anybody this morning who has any prayer needs, or anybody who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, we would invite you to come up, or our shepherds will be in the back as we all stand and sing together.